Hello, listeners, and welcome to this special episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and with the election just a few days away, I thought I would take this opportunity to release another episode on Qanon. If you are unsure of what Qanon is, you can go back and listen to my earlier episodes, or find an in-depth look at Qanon on my other podcast, The Conspiracy Vault. A quick bit of business before we start. For anyone who would like to, you can support my podcast for as little as £1 a month through patreon.com/The Cult Vault. I also have an Android app you can download and watch ads to support. It's called The Cult Vault and it's available on Google Play. If you have 5 minutes, please leave a review of the podcast, share and follow. This helps hugely with spreading the word and reaching new listeners. Now, enough of business. This episode is more of a political discussion than an episode on cults, but I thought people would still be interested in the deep discussion my guest speaker Paul and I got into. So here it is. Hi Paul, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know we're going to talk about a subject that I have covered previously on the podcast, but with the upcoming election and so many more stories coming out about this current movement, I thought it was important to shed some more light on the entire thing. So would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yeah. My name is Paul. I'm a music teacher in Ohio, in the U.S. So I play percussion for anybody that's interested in that. So, yeah.
And Ohio, is it a particular area of Ohio that is quite religious based?
I don't know that. Ohio has very rural areas. So I live in like a little village and, it's all farms around me. But there's also like a lot of cities and stuff too, and a lot of times like those are very mixed. So
right,
I'm actually not sure about that.
So we're going to talk today about the ever-growing movement of QAnon and its rapid take of the world and in every corner. So what is you mentioned before I pressed the record button that you have a basic understanding of QAnon from an American perspective. So can you just give the listeners a brief summary of what you think that is?
Sure. So from my understanding, QAnon is a theory that there is an underground group of elitists, or maybe not even underground because they're working among us in Congress and the House and Senate and stuff. So of powerful people that are trying to control and manipulate the world, and they are involved in Satan worship and pedophilia, child sacrifice, cannibalism, and things like that. And so they purposefully create division where they can in order to maintain their power and kind of lead us into a destructive time.
So yeah, so that I think that's pretty well summarized. That's what QAnon believers are saying. That's what they believe is happening with elitists in the celebrity realm, in the upper echelons of politics.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing to mention about this theory is that Donald Trump is going to be the person to bring all of these menacing people to justice.
Yeah. So in the theory, Donald Trump was personally recruited by the military in order to kind of get these people out, because they, at least from the exposure to QAnon that I have, Um, I've been told that the people who are running the House and Senate in America are not really, it's not really the U.S. government. They're infiltrators and bad actors, and people that we need to get out. But they're not really what America, what we're at, where we're at right now. In terms of a country, it's that we've been infiltrated, and Donald Trump uh, needs to has been recruited in order to get them out.
And I think it's something to along the lines of every president since a particular president, JFK, every president since JFK has been involved in this infiltration of the American government, and Trump is the first president to be on the side of justice to bring these people down. And I read recently that now that Trump and his wife have contracted coronavirus, that QAnon believers are now spinning this story to suggest that Trump is using his need to go into self-isolation as a ruse to go behind the scenes where nobody can see him and start bringing down some of these evil people and wrongdoers. So QAnon has a very clever way of turning every situation into rhetoric that benefits and furthers their message. So a few weeks ago, QAnon believers would say coronavirus doesn't exist. It's the government trying to make you wear masks to control you. And then as soon as Trump, their almighty leader, contracts coronavirus, they then spin that to their advantage by saying that he doesn't really have it. He's just using that as an excuse to go behind the scenes and take down some of these people that are, sacrificing babies and involved in child trafficking and all that stuff. So that's what I'm getting from over here in the UK. Is that sort of accurate to what is actually happening in America?
So in terms of the President Trump getting the coronavirus, unfortunately I had a really busy day yesterday, and so I wasn't able to, which is when he contracted the coronavirus. So this is many weeks in the past for your listeners, but
yes, yeah.
Where I am, it happened yesterday. So I haven't seen things from QAnon, but that doesn't really surprise me. But it definitely is the case that they will try to flip every world event into being something that President Trump is doing in order to eradicate the child sex pedophile ring, or just the control that they have. One of the things, and I kind of talk about this a little bit more, but one of the things that is, I think, most dangerous about Q is the fact that Q himself or herself or themselves doesn't actually say a whole lot. They give little snippets, and then it's up to the other people to interpret what that means. And so they're going off of very little information that they recognize may or may not be factual, because one of QAnon's thing is disinformation is necessary. And so some of the things Q will say or will later admit this was a lie in order to kind of throw the other people off my track. So one of the issues is that you have events happening, and then you have Q saying something small. And sometimes they're a little bit bigger, but still require interpretation. And you just have people going all over and trying to figure out what's being said. And a lot of the times, Q is not, for a lot of things, is not monolithic. I mean, because you'll have straight up coronavirus deniers saying it's all fake, none of it's real. You'll have people believing that it's real, but that it was started by the government, or at least furthered by the government. One of the things that I've seen is the 5G towers are doing coronavirus, and then there's other people that are just if the coronavirus is real and it started in China and it spread like a normal virus. It's just not as big of a deal as what everybody else is making it out to be. And so, like, you have all of these different stances that are all trying to interpret the Q's message. And so, like, you get these wild and varied interpretations of things. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that people are saying that he's kind of just recouping and like doing stuff behind the scenes in order to take down these bad actors.
And you mentioned in some of our correspondence to one another that you've actually been affected by the Q movement because of a family member who has bought into this rhetoric and this ideal. So do you just want to explain to the listeners a little bit about that situation?
Sure. So I became aware of QAnon through my uncle. So right now he lives many states away from me, so we aren't able to see each other very often. And that's some background on our relationship. When I was growing up, he was one of the people that I looked up to the most, if not the most. So like, as I'm talking about this, I want to stress that like, I love my uncle, you know, and he himself is a very loving and genuine man. And he's been incredibly supportive of me and my wife. And he's always like showered us with love and helped us when we needed it. So like, I don't think that the people in Q are like bad people. I mean, some of them are, but that's with anything. But when I was about 8, he joined the Air Force. And he stayed with that for a while. I think that he did at least 2 tours in Iraq. I'm having trouble remembering the specifics though. And so me as a kid, it was really hard for me because I like never saw him. But even when he was away, I still kind of like idolized him as a kid. So when he would come back, we would have these really in-depth conversations. And he was always like, from my memory, at least from like when he would come back, when he was on leave and stuff, he's always somewhat into conspiracy theories. So I remember he came back, I think it was around 2010, with a book about like the 2012 apocalypse and stuff, and talking like to me about the possibility of something cataclysmic happening and like rich people or powerful people looking to escape and leave us all behind. And he wasn't dogmatic about it. He wasn't like, this is what's going to happen. This is like, this makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that this has, you know, validity to it. So after he left the Air Force, he moved to another state. So I still would rarely get to see him. Because of this, most of our conversations wind up happening online, typically via Facebook, which, as we all know, is the beacon of civil discussion and rationality. We had gotten into like a pretty heated argument for political things several times, like over the past few years, before I knew about any of this stuff. So earlier this year, in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the BLM protests, the calls to defund the police here, I posted a few things at various times talking about systemic racism. And there were 2 posts in particular that kind of like brought to light his belief in the QAnon theory. So the first one, I posted an article called "What is White Privilege Really?" And the second one was just a report from the National Exoneration Registry called "Race and Wrongful Conviction in the U.S.," which covers the disparity between white people and people of color when it comes to wrongful convictions, severity of sentences, and the process of exoneration. So in both of these instances, for both of these posts, my uncle responded to them, and then afterwards kind of went to messaging me. I do want to say off the bat that I've heard a lot of horror stories about people who have talked with QAnon believers, and those people are like being belligerent and very aggressive. And this was not my instance, like, or my experience. My uncle was very, like, he tried his best to be, you know, rational and have like, you know, like take my argument seriously and address it. So I am thankful for that. But I know that that's not everybody's experience. So, So his points essentially boil down to like, why are we seeing the disparities in persisting? So he doesn't dispute that, you know, Black people are wrongfully convicted of
Yeah, yeah.
crimes than white
Definitely
people.
those on the fringes of society and people within sort of minority ethnicity
Mhm.
groups seem to be, I mean, well, the statistics are out there and they can't, as you say, they can't be disputed. So,
Yeah, right. Well, you say they can't be disputed, and they are. People dispute them every day. So his point is like, well, I don't disagree that there's disparity. The question that we have to ask is why we're seeing the disparity, which is a great question to ask. And we just have different answers to that question. And so his answer is that the United States has been, infiltrated by these bad actors that are purposefully sowing division in order to maintain power. And so they're pointing to problems that don't exist in order to perpetuate these false narratives to increase infighting and state control. And the biggest of these made up problems would be, white privilege and systemic racism. They're at least in this moment right now, until kind of the culture goes into another area and they point to that one instead to kind of act as a distraction from, the real issues.
mm-hmm.
So after the first post that I made, he sent me this message detailing like this 13-step process of the deep state, which is the first time that I've heard of like a deep state conspiracy theory. And like at this time, I didn't know what Q was, or that's what my uncle was into. And so the conversation went on from there. It was actually, a decent conversation. But there were some obviously concerning things. So fast forward a little bit, and I posted the report on wrongful convictions, and he agreed with the data, but just argued that systemic racism wasn't a thing. And that was really weird because, like, as we were talking, like, he would admit that, like, yeah, the justice system favors or disadvantages Black people disproportionately than they would disadvantage white people. And it just, from my perspective, it seemed like he was agreeing that the definition of systemic racism is happening, but he didn't agree but he just like wouldn't say it.
Right.
And so, like his reasoning for like why this is happening is different than mine. And his is that like this is purposefully perpetuated by these bad actors
Right.
who are in control right now. So this discussion was like one of our more in-depth ones. And at the end of it, he told me, because we had like this really, really long discussion about it. So at the end of it, he told me that he would just send me some stuff. And that's when I learned about Q. So he sent me to a website to read like the actual Q drops. And he sent me a couple of videos from QAnon interpreters. And then he talked a little bit about how his worldview shifted when he found out Q, and how he realized that all of his previous sources had been compromised in some way. And he encouraged me to kind of engage with the material and try to find fault, but at the same time to keep an open mind. So I mean, that's how I learned about Q, and that's how I learned that my uncle was into it.
So what were your initial reactions to these documents that he'd sent you, and you're reading through these things, and because I'm guessing that a lot of that is how the message is spread through Facebook sharing links and posts and conspiracy theories and all things that link back to Q drops and Q and who is Q and all these things. Yeah. So some people must read those documents and think, do you know what? Everything on there to me sounds completely rational, completely true, and I cannot believe that I didn't see it before. What's your reaction? Because you're sitting here talking to me now, which leads me to think that you didn't have that awakening, in inverted commas, when you're reading through these links.
So one of the things that he had mentioned to me is that the Q drops themselves are really hard to understand. And so because of that's which is why he sent like the QAnon interpreters, which is maybe like that's not the phrase that he used, but these people that kind of go through the Q drops, go through the timeline of world events that are happening, and then saying, okay, well, this refers to this, and this refers to this. This Q drop was obviously not true. So my initial reaction was less so about the claims that Q was making and more so about the tactics that Q was using.
Right. Okay.
Because like, I mean, I'm like, because my uncle told me to start at the beginning and not like where we are right now.
Right.
And just like work my way through them. And I didn't read through all of them. I read, I think, about 200 of them. But there's like over 4,000. So,
Wow. That
so
sounds
like,
almost like when people join like I'll just use a random example. Somebody joins a yoga group in their local community, and the first few sessions they're just yoga, and then a little bit of scripture is brought into the third yoga session, and then on the fourth you meet somebody who says that they're part of a bigger yoga session, and that bigger yoga session has somebody that has all the answers to all the questions in life that you've ever asked. And it sounds
right.
like if he tells you to start at the very beginning, that to me has a sense of almost indoctrination to the point where you have to go to the start, and slowly you'll be brought into this state of believing almost. But that might just be me being skeptical. I don't know, but
no, I mean, I think that's got a lot of validity to it. And for me, like tactic wise, there were two things that like really just red flags kind of going off. They have a lot of distrust of the mainstream media, and one of Q has like several kind of mottos that they say over and over again, and one of them is "You are the news." Like you can't trust these other news sources. They're all, they would call it like Project Mockingbird or Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA has infiltrated all of the media and is controlling everything it's saying. So you can't trust what's being said. You are the news and not them. So they have like this distrust of, what we would consider verified sources. I mean, obviously, it's news media is always going to be somewhat sensationalist, and you can't report on anything without like having at least some bias. I mean, but most people take those things into consideration when they're listening to the news, but this is more of a, complete distrust for the mainstream media, or at least most distrust for the mainstream media. And then on top of that is Q's claim that disinformation is necessary. And so they will post things that even QAnon people will say, okay, well, this isn't true, but they don't know it at the time. They can only know it in retrospect because the Q drops are posted in order to throw off people. And so you have this kind of double whammy where that some things are going to be lies, and you can't like verify anything through like mainstream media sources. And so Q becomes this thing where this guy is just saying things, and there's no way that you can disprove them, because anything that you would use to disprove them is just not trustworthy. You can't trust that. And so that's very concerning. And I think that it is an incredibly smart tactic for Q to use in order to, inculcate people into, believing them and not trying to disprove them and stuff.
Yeah, it is strange. I mean, going back to what you said before about the initial Q drops that were posted that launched this entire thing and put this whole thing in motion, were two posts of basically incoherent strange, almost stream of consciousness of
Mhm.
somebody on 4chan, just kind of, which I speak about in my QAnon episode. So if you haven't listened, it's on my other podcast, The Conspiracy Vault, and it goes into detail about QAnon, where it started, how it developed, and where we are today. It's almost like the three people sit down and they're like, okay, so we're going to disentangle this message and we're going to tell the world exactly what is meant by this. And I got the feeling that I was sitting down to an English, like a book in English, and being told to read this line that Shakespeare has written and give it my interpretation. But what's happened with this is that people have given the air interpretation of what this person has written on 4chan, and that interpretation is then taken as gospel. And that is exactly what that person meant. And it doesn't matter what anybody says, the way that it was initially interpreted, and that's where this whole deep state Hillary Clinton pedophile ring Pizzagate thing has all come from, is that any other interpretation now, if somebody was to go back and say, well, maybe this person meant that, nope. And the interpretation itself did not come from the original Q drop. That's another concerning thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is maybe going off on a tangent. So you can cut this out if you want to, but like, it just doesn't make sense to me that this would be Q's approach if Q is legitimate. Like, he starts like the first post, at least the first post that I'm aware of, is the one that says that Hillary Clinton is going to be arrested, and that didn't happen. Like, why would you start with something false? Like, normally you would start, like, if this was what you were actually doing, if you were a real government agent working with the president in order to get people, to wake people up, and to get people out of powerful positions that are in them, B, you would begin by posting real things in order to show everybody that you have, like, show people that you have legitimacy, because the disinformation is necessary thing is only the case because, in this theory, there are other people that are watching the Q drops that need to be they need to be distracted, and so Q posts things that are distractions for them. But they're not going to be watching that if you haven't already gained some sort of legitimacy. Like, if you're just some random 4chaner, they're not going to care. And one of the videos that my uncle sent me, which was just kind of like this mass explanation of what QAnon is. He just like offhandedly says, and everybody knows that, like, the politicians are always on 4chans and stuff, and so, like, that's why, or 8chan, I think, one of the two, and so that's why he posted there. I was like, does everybody know that? I would be surprised if any of the Congress people know what that is.
Yeah, and is he trying to suggest then that the person that originally posted that was a member of a politician? And is that, because that to me almost sounds like he's trying to suggest that that Q himself could be Trump?
Well, I don't think that Q people would say that he's Trump, because there are specific Q drops that are signed as Trump.
Okay. All right.
And so there are there's disagreement of whether or not Q is like one single person or if it's a group of people. And so there will be a couple of posts that people believe Donald Trump wrote this, but they don't think that for most of the Q posts. So the ones that are from President Trump are specifically signed by him, or they have his initials numerically.
And has that been historic since the start of the movement, or has that been a case since Trump? Because Q's been around for a while, for a few years now, and it was only in the last sort of 6 weeks to 2 months. So we're just at the very start of October now for the listeners that are tuning in when this episode is released. He only, in the last 2 months or so, in a press conference, actually physically and verbally acknowledged Q, which blew Twitter up. Everybody
Yeah.
started tweeting, where we go, one we go all, and all the
Mm-hmm.
hashtags, and all the people that have bought into Q and its messages. It was just absolutely everywhere. And that was the first time that I could find on record that he had actually made a nod to Q to say, that he didn't outright say that what Q is saying is true, but he didn't deny it either.
Right.
So obviously the subtext of either of those things, the one that Q will run with is the fact that he didn't deny it. So that must mean it is true, even though he didn't say in the same breath that it is true.
Right. Well, and I mean, it was just a good day for Q people because he didn't denounce it, and he complimented them. He said, well, I don't really know much about it, but from what I've heard, there are people that just, they love their country, and so, I mean, which is true. Like, Q people have a great love for their country, and that's what drives them, because they think that their country is in danger.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. I don't think that it's a recent thing that Q people think that President Trump is involved. So there are actually, one of the quote proofs that QAnon is true is the claim that Q will post something, and then Trump will say something that echoes that.
Right.
Which is why, the QAnon movement is known also as the Great Awakening. Well, I guess that's not as so, but like, Q had posted something like, the storm is coming, or it's the calm before the storm, and then later President Trump said, feels like the calm before the storm.
Yeah.
And he was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, you'll find out. And
Yeah.
so like, and I'm not sure. And so like, to be honest, initially as I was reading the QAnon posts, in keeping an open mind, I wasn't immediately like, this guy is just some dude in a basement. I mean, obviously that was one of my thoughts, but like, before it coming to my mind that, okay, this is a legitimate person that is trying to, get rid of essentially terrorists and this underground sex pedophile ring, really what it is just pro-Trump propaganda. And like, part of me, like, there's a little while, like, as I was looking into it, where I was like, it doesn't matter to me whether or not like these proofs are real, because even if Q is somebody that's like higher up in the government,
Mm-hmm.
working with President Trump, that doesn't mean that he's the good guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
For all we know, President Trump is on, like, and this isn't what I think, but hypothetically speaking, like, for all we know, President Trump is in on these on these things, and so he is echoing these thoughts. But really, they're just trying to insulate their fan base.
Wow, we could. I mean, this hadn't even occurred to me until just now, but we could come up with our own conspiracy theories right now by suggesting that shortly after Trump is sworn into the White House, his media team start working hard on his re-election campaign, which is implementing Q, getting 3 or 4 social media influencers to interpret these Q drops on 4chan, and they could just be part of the media team, people who have been paid to say, we've detangled these coded messages in this 4chan post. And then from 2017 onwards, just slowly building, creating all these Twitter accounts. And then before you know it, these things, they just pick up traction organically on their own. It's the same as me trying to build a fan base for my podcast. The more you post things, the more of a following you pick up, retweets and shared posts, and and then people like your uncle is sending you all of that propaganda to read through. So it could easily just be his re-election campaign.
Yeah. And like, that's not what I think is happening, but that has a lot more legitimacy, and like, yeah, it has a lot more legitimacy than what Q and QAnon believers like actually espouse. And like, to be fair, President Trump started on his reelection campaign like almost immediately after he was in office. It was like he's in office, and then like very soon after he's going to
Mm-hmm.
states and trying to you know
So, do
um
you think that that Q is having an impact on his election campaign? And if so, what type of effect do you think that is?
so I think that it is definitely having some kind of effect on his campaign. I don't think that most of his followers are QAnon believers, but I think that it is a significant portion. Um, and I'm like, they're his most loyal ones, and they're the people that are always going to go to bat for him, and kind of try to drown out dissenting voices on social media platforms and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think that it is a legitimate. I think that it's a legitimate number of people that are going to affect the election, that are like in this group of people that are not going to be in any way
Mm.
affected by anything that President Trump does. I mean, like, over the past couple of weeks, we've had President Trump saying that, um, you know, he's not, or he was asked if he would, commit to a peaceful transfer of power, and he did not do that. He's continuously, um, you know, kind of hinting that he wants not just another term, but he wants a third term.
Mm.
And they're all over it. And so, and not only did he not say that he's not going to commit to, or not only did he not say that he would commit to a peaceful transfer of power, but he essentially undermines the entire American like system of voting by saying,
Yeah,
"Oh, the ballots are bad," you know.
yeah.
You can't trust the ballot. So like, you're saying you can't trust the votes, and like, like, if a Democrat had said that, Republicans, like all of the people that are voting for Q, if Obama had said that, if President Obama had said that, they would be. I think there would be riots in the street. Like,
It's
it
strange,
would
isn't
not go
it?
over well.
The difference between Obama and Trump and how much has changed in American politics in just the last 5 years is it's actually like it's like whiplash. It's really hard to get your head
Oh
around.
yeah. Well, and there are like a lot of people have made like these compilation videos, and it's side by sides of news anchors reporting on President Obama and news anchors reporting on President Trump, and like, they do the exact same thing, and like, the reaction is just completely different from like the pro-Trump people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is insane of like, how you were not okay with this 4 years ago. How are you okay with this
Yeah,
now?
yeah, yeah,
And like, not only are you okay with it, like, you're not just like, okay, I guess I'll allow that. It's like, yeah, you need to be
yeah.
doing that. That's really good. Good job.
It's definitely interesting, and I do wonder how it's going to turn out. I mean, for people that are listening now, we've just had the presidential debate, the first one. I mean, I know there's supposed to be more, but some conspiracy theorists are coming out saying that Trump has contracted, in inverted commas again, coronavirus, which is just a way of him not having to deal with a second presidential debate because of the absolute car crash that the first one was.
Yeah.
And some other people are saying that, he said that he won't accept the muted microphone approach to the second presidential debate because he, quote, won the first debate, which is, I don't know if not allowing somebody to get a word in edgeways is a win necessarily. So anyone that's listening can see that I'm probably more towards the left wing of politics than I am towards the right. And I'm all for equal rights and stuff as well, which is not a message I feel Trump has portrayed in the last 5 years. So
yeah. So like, I feel like a lot of the push that like President Trump is kind of faking the coronavirus, and I think that he legitimately has it. because I don't think that he would fake something like that. Because most of the things that he has kind of espoused is like, oh, I'm in perfect health, I'm in impeccable health, and
I
I
didn't
mean,
even cross my mind his age as well with the virus.
oh yeah, yeah, and like at the debate, he was making fun of uh former Vice President Joe Biden for like how often he wears masks and stuff. Like I feel like that, you know, I don't think that he's necessarily, I don't think that he's faking it, but a lot of the people that are saying that he's faking it, I think are from the, like, actually the left,
Mm.
because, um, you know, they are planning to impose some kind of restrictions in order to stop interruptions
Yeah.
because,
Yeah. And also you'd want to believe as a Joe Biden, voter, or a voter of somebody other than Trump, that he doesn't have the virus and he's too scared to actually go up against somebody
right.
in a structured way that doesn't sound like a teenager or young child having a tantrum.
Yeah.
So it I mean, it is a difficult one. And just to go back quickly on the religious side of things,
Mm-hmm.
I know that in America there's been some restrictions around COVID lifted for congregations of Christians to meet, and that has caused spikes in some areas of America of the virus and a lot of that was because devout Christian groups, religious groups, were saying that they can't catch the virus because they're protected by their Lord and Savior, which isn't necessarily true, because we can see from people in those areas and those groups of people that have actually contracted the virus that it has started within these church groups and spread in these church groups further. So a lot of Christian voters are going to back Trump because he has a lot of religious messages in his political campaign, and I think he seems to have, for the most part, the religious people backing him. So, do you think that that's another group of people who might buy into the QAnon rhetoric?
Yeah. So, I do. Not all, not even most Christians, would. Um, but there was actually, I can't remember the name of the article, but a woman named Katie Beatty, I think, um, recently, I'm going to look it up. It's a really good article. And there's like an NPR. Um, okay. So a woman named Katie Beatty, she's a journalist, has an article called QAnon is the alternative religion that's coming to your church. And it's a really good article. And then NPR interviewed her, and that piece is called "How QAnon Conspiracy is Spreading in Christian Communities Across the U.S." And she talks to several pastors about the QAnon thing, and a lot of them are just having, like, the pastors recognize that this is all bogus, but they're having a really hard time reining in their congregants because at this, like, right now, so QAnon has seen this huge spike because of COVID, because everybody's on the internet right now, and not meeting in person and stuff. And even, like, I mean, there are a lot of churches that kept on meeting for during COVID, but a lot of them went to just online sermons for a while.
Right. Yeah.
And so everything was online, and so and that's where the mass propagation of QAnon happens. And so she's talking to these pastors, and they're like, they just feel overwhelmed because they feel like they can't rein this thing in, because they're getting their information from the internet, and they're not, they already have a distrust of experts, because of the mass media. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and you kind of see that a little bit in many Christian communities, for certain things where there's like a distrust of certain scientific consensuses in modern science, and there's a kind of a distrust in media and how things report. And so I think that has like, that's a double-edged sword for a lot of Christians, because like your pastor is an expert too. Like, and so if you start like with the one area, for some people that's going to lead into the other, and they're just going to be like, well, I just don't trust that my pastor's being legitimate. And so when he's trying to rein me in, he's just as much of a sheep as the mass media is.
Yeah.
You know.
On the flip side of what you were just saying, it's almost like if Trump is so proactive for congregations to get back together, for religious meetings to continue as normal, and if he's such an advocate for the church, it's also hard for priests and leaders of the congregations to dismiss what Trump is saying as well, because he's advocating for the church. And
right.
So anyone that comes in and says, I'm a Q believer, it'd be hard for people to say, well, that's not really a good thing. Because he has such a strong message around the church.
Yeah, I think President Trump's relationship with the Christian church in America, I think, is really interesting, because you will have people that are like into the people that are into the Q thing, and even some that aren't, that are like, oh yeah, you know, President Trump is this amazing Christian man that is, you know, doing his best to you know, spread the Christian message. And I think, like, from anecdotally speaking, from my experience, and even somebody that runs in like theologically conservative circles, most of the people that I know, you know, don't think that Trump is a legitimate Christian.
No.
And like they recognize that, you know, he does things that still that are detestable from a Christian perspective. And really, it's more of a fear of the Democrats that drives them to vote for President Trump than it is, you know, believing that he is legitimately a role model for the Christian perspective. And so, like, one of the big talking points in these circles is, well, I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm not voting for somebody that's supposed to be morally sufficient. I'm voting for somebody that's, I think, is going to be a good leader for the country. But
just looking here on usnews.com from a 2019 article, 65% of American adults do describe themselves as Christian. So that's a huge amount of the population that you are going to be speaking to commonly when you go on the stand, so to speak, in front of the public, in front of the cameras, and say, you know, I'm a good Christian man, I have Christian values, and I hope to bring them into office with me when you give me a first, second, third term. So and in 2009 that number was 77%. So when he was actually sworn in, I can imagine that it was a very high number of people that were like, well, I'm Christian and he's Christian, so I'm going to vote for the Christian. But whether he is a practicing devout or good Christian is another thing entirely. Again, it's just like him, even if he does not believe in the legitimacy of Q, even if he can read all the articles and be like, oh my goodness, where has this come from? What does all of this stuff mean? Who sat down and thought of these things? If it's going to further his message, he's going to say that he thinks it's a good thing.
He, like, the impression that I get of him is that it doesn't really matter who it is that is supporting him, but if somebody is supporting him, he's gonna back them, or at least he's not gonna condemn them most of the time.
Which I'm sure is what the other runners are doing as well, and other members of you know, either side of politics. But just going back to your uncle again, so you've had this exchange of this initial document on statistics around marginalized community groups and people of
Mhm.
color. And then there's another article that you two have a dispute over, and that is around
Child sex trafficking.
That's it. Yeah. So you share a post on statistics around child sex trafficking, and your uncle gets in touch with you again, and you have a similar conversation, but this time it ends a bit differently.
Yeah. So as many people who are familiar with Q knows, Q folks have kind of co-opted a hashtag of hashtag Save the Children, and then kind of adapted it a little bit to also hashtag Save Our Children, because of the Q narrative that, a group of elites are cannibalizing and sexually abusing children. So obviously for most rational people today, we would not dispute that there is a human trafficking issue that needs serious attention. However, there are several issues with the way that Q and Q followers do this. So like, for example, they give inflated numbers of people that are affected. They accuse people of like the most heinous things that you could think of without any evidence for it. And and they call into organizations that are legitimately trying to do things about human trafficking, with bogus tips over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
The Wayfair thing is a good example of this, and it makes it harder for the people that are working in rescuing people from sex trafficking rings to actually do their job. So I shared a post from a woman who works at a local organization that combats human trafficking, and her post was addressing the influx of attention given to child sex trafficking. And she praised the additional awareness, but she noted a lot of concerns that she's had. And so in her post, she actually urges people to not use the hashtag Save the Children because it is, quote, linked to a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Initially, my uncle commented on it and he just said, finally, something that we agree on. And that was it. But then later he responded with a much longer comment where he talked about the global, these global secret group of powerful people distracting us from the real things that they're doing, which is child abuse, child sacrifice, child cannibalism, child torture, child rape, child exploitation, slavery, hunting. And then just to name a few. And his post was like about how, well, this isn't something that we're just now doing, but the tide is in our favor, and but we've been working on this for a long time. So he says all of these things, and afterwards, I pointed out that like the post itself is designed to combat the very conspiracy theories that he perpetuates in that comment.
Yeah.
Because his thing is that like, and he responded like, I'm not in any way in disagreement with the post. I'm simply adding to it.
Yeah.
But the post specifically, like it says, conspiracy theory, so it doesn't name the QAnon conspiracy, but it's obviously the one that it has in mind.
Yeah.
So, and I asked him for like the numbers and evidence that he had for child cannibalism, because I believe that, child sex trafficking is a real issue. Not so much child cannibalism, So, and I also asked him for like a list of politicians that are involved, because the vast majority of the discussion kind of centered around whether or not it was acceptable to like call people child abusers and cannibals without any tangible proof.
I mean, it's a good question.
And I asked him for his sources, and his response was simply that he had already given me his source, which was Q. So so the more that time passes, I kind of wish that I'd responded differently, but I like at the time I just told him that.
Almost like he did the same thing though. He left that one comment and he went away for a little while, and maybe he read something in that time that spurred him to come back to your post, or maybe he dwelled on it for a little bit of time and came back and said, I agreed with it earlier, but actually now I think there's a few things that I want to point out, which is interesting because I did an episode on my conspiracy podcast about Wayfair, and I spoke a little bit about statistics around human child trafficking, trafficking of Indigenous women. The statistics seem to be quite high, but there hasn't been any accurate data that has been released around child trafficking since 2009. So anytime you read anything around child trafficking, it's going to be going back to those statistics from over a decade ago. So when Q supporters are coming out with these statistics, they are statistics that are no longer accurate. The numbers could be much higher than that. The numbers could be much lower than that now. But at the same time, I think when the QAnon conspiracy blew up on the internet, when the Wayfair conspiracy blew up on the internet, those charities and those services around child trafficking, as you have just said, and as this article was trying to point out, were so flooded with the same concerned people on the internet saying, I think Wayfair are trying to sell children through their overpriced furniture, that any calls that may have come through about people that have been trained, like people that work for CPS, like Child Protective Services, might have actually seen some had a conversation with a young person or that worries them. There might have been a call from an airport about a young person that didn't have a passport, or the passport's names didn't match the guardian that she was with, or the person or the young person in the airport had a brand on their wrist. And people that have actually been trained, like airport staff, for example, to notice a potential child being trafficked in real time, that call might not have been able to have been answered as quickly as it should have been because of the influx of calls coming from people who are saying that Wayfair are selling children through furniture, which was debunked on Snopes and other sources, which will just be discredited by Q followers. But at the same time, I think the difficulty with the conversation like the one you had with your uncle is the people making those phone calls and trying to further their own research on the internet and provide more examples of why this is actually happening with Wayfair right now and children are in danger, is because they truly believe they're doing good. They really do think they're going to save children's lives. But as we've just said, you need to make sure you keep those avenues of communication between the professionals and those who have been trained or those who see something suspicious to be able to make those phone calls and say, I think there's a child here that's in danger. And that article is simply just trying to get that message across and say, this is the potential harm we are doing when thousands of people call to tell us that Wayfair are selling children, when actually there could be a thing happening that needs to be addressed now. So we've obviously can have a rational conversation about that and why conspiracy theorists should be careful when trying to save the children. But your uncle is he truly believes when he responds, adding to the conspiracy theory and also adding to the further damage of the work trying to be done by the professionals, that he is helping. He genuinely believes that.
Yeah. And like, so in the thing, like, so his, essentially his last comment, like in that thread was, and let's say that the Q thing is wrong, because in it, and I kind of regret the way that I did this, but in it, I was just like, cause he mentioned Q as like referenced his source, which was Q. It's like, Q is not a source of factual information. And they provide no sources, and it's at best, it's a LARPer.
Yeah.
And so he was like, let's say that the Q thing is all bogus. Let's say it's all not true. Why are you so against, you put like, this is going to lead to a good thing. How, what's the harm in this? And I was like, well, the thing that I just posted, and also I'm like, I'd also posted an article by the Polaris Project detailing like why it was harmful to the organization. It was like, well, the things that I posted go over that. Like it makes it much harder for them when you're spreading this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and like, in terms of the numbers, like I doubt that they're like even going back to that report. Like the way that these things kind of spread is like somebody posts it and then, somebody reads that and they're like, oh wow, that's a really big number, I want to do something about that, and then they just hit share. They
Yeah.
don't fact check. um
But they
and for
can't
like,
fact check.
right, yeah, and for the well, the problem is with that, like, you will get people, because the Save the Children thing is deceptive, because everybody wants to end child sex trafficking,
Yep,
you
of
know.
course, of
And
course.
so like I know people who were sharing Save the Children stuff, um, not knowing that it was linked to a conspiracy theory, because they legitimately wanted to do
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
Because yeah, and so um, yeah, it's hard, because there's there's people that want to do good, and then there's Q people who want to do
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
the Q people are posting this information, and a lot of the information is wrong. And because the other people like just aren't aware of it, they also
yeah.
post it. And so they're spreading it without knowing fully what they're spreading.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, in the same way that people want to save the children, of course, if they read an article that Hillary Clinton is kidnapping children, sexually abusing children, involved in a mass paedophile ring, using children as, you know, cannibalistically, that is the quickest way to probably discredit somebody's authenticity and their reputation. What is the worst thing you could say about somebody? Probably that they harm a child. So you take Hillary Clinton and anyone involved with her and her inner circle, and anybody who's ever had any contact with Hillary Clinton over the last 20 years, and you're not only saying that she harms children, but you're then going into details about all the different ways she could possibly harm children. And that's the worst thing you can do on this earth. The worst crime you can commit is harming a child. And you see it in the prison system all the time. You know, if you have harmed a child, you have to be put in a separate part of the prison where you can't be accessed by the general population, because your life is at risk more so than other people in that prison, because people don't tolerate you harming children. And so she's, by Q followers, her reputation is completely tarnished. I, for one, do believe that Hillary Clinton has been involved in some dodgy, unethical, sinful, harmful things throughout her political career, but I don't think she's been eating children.
Right. Yeah.
I maybe she has been. I don't know, but I don't. I do believe she is corrupt and probably has done some questionable things
Yeah.
in
And
her
I like,
position of power.
to their credit, I don't completely discount that the Clintons have been involved in some kind of, or at least complicit in some kind of sex trafficking, because of the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell situation. So
I
I'm
mean,
not
yeah,
saying that that is the case.
yeah. That's another example, though, isn't it? There's this flight log going around from Jeffrey Epstein at the moment that Q followers are spreading like wildfire, and there's no way to know where that flight log came from. It could just be like, I know people are saying that they these are all the names of people that visited, you know, Epstein's island, or went on his private jet. But how? We don't know that. Somebody
Right.
could have just written that list and said, this is the
Yeah.
list and this came from authorities. There's no court stamp on it. There's no official documentation on it. There's no watermark on these documents that to say that they are official. And
Yep.
as far as I can tell from researching on the internet, the official files haven't even been distributed publicly because the investigation is still ongoing. So you have this second conversation with your uncle. Things get a bit more heated this time, and where do you leave your discussion eventually, and where do you stand with him now?
Sure. So he after that, he messages me, saying that during our discussion he was starting to feel animosity towards me, and that he doesn't want to feel that when he's talking to me or about me. So from now on, he's just not going to talk to me about politics, religion, or world events, like, ever. So, which Yeah. I don't really think I know yet how it's going to affect our relationship. We have kind of this weird relationship where like we love each other a lot, but we don't talk about too many things. And when we do talk about them, we disagree a lot of the time. And a lot of the things that we talk about are the things that he said that he doesn't want to talk about anymore. So religion, world events, politics.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um, so, and we definitely have fewer interactions and in-depth discussions now. But I mean, it's hard to say that that's completely true because like we'll go with like months without really
Yeah.
talking to each
Yeah.
other much, and then big long conversation. We are a little bit,
Right.
you know.
So do you feel like, so this is the uncle that you were really close to growing up, somebody you really admired and looked up to. Do you feel like you can have a conversation with him now that doesn't include anything to do with Q?
I do, yeah. I like I kind of mentioned this before, but like again, I've heard a lot of horror stories of people that are in Q, and that is just not the experience that I've had with my own.
Okay.
So and like he even says that like he says that he fully believes that Q is real and that like it's a legitimate thing, but like it his double-edged sword is that like he's just skeptical of everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so even when it comes to something that he full-heartedly, is into, like the Q, there's still like a part of him that is like questioning that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so but I do think that we could have conversations for sure
Yeah. Yeah.
about things that
Yeah.
aren't in
That's
Q.
good.
It's just that
That's good.
typically, yeah.
Do you know of any of your other family members who have been interested in reading any of these documents and Q drops?
Yeah. So my aunt, his wife, is into it as well, I think, because she shares the same kind of stuff that he does. Um, and then I haven't talked to these people about him, but based on what they're sharing, I have a cousin that's into Q, I think, because he posted a thing that's like, um, and this is the only thing that I've ever seen him post, but like it seemed like he wasn't joking about it, but he was like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
who else is it? Just posting to see who else is in Q and stuff like that. Um, my former college roommate and high school friend, I think, is into it,
Right.
which that one really surprises me.
And your cousin, what age is he? 20s, 30s?
He's 20s. He's younger
Okay.
than me, so um,
Interesting.
I'm not sure. We're not particularly close.
Okay.
I think that he's probably around like 21 or 22.
Okay.
He's pretty young.
And what do you think the target audience is for Q? Because I think it started off being like the meme started off as Karens. All the Karens were following Q. So middle-aged, middle class, predominantly white women of America, almost like quote soccer mums, stay-at-home mums, women with a lot of time who were investing and sharing a lot of this propaganda originally over the internet. But I don't know if that's necessarily the target audience anymore. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Man, I really don't know what like who the initial target demographic is, but um, I think that it was most likely probably really the most common among Gen Xers and maybe boomers. But I think that millennials have been pretty rapidly getting into it since quarantine started.
I remember speaking, the person I interviewed around QAnon a few weeks back on the podcast, spoke about the relationship with their grandmother completely breaking down because of her having to relate every conversation back to something to do with Q. And it came to light that she had experienced a lot of physical abuse and trauma when she was growing up. And the person that her abuser turned out to be very right-wing, and really wanted Trump to be elected for president for his first term. And she managed to escape that abusive relationship, but the I don't know if it's brainwashing, but the impact that he had on her life means that she still maintains her interest in Trump and hoping that he'll be re-elected for a second term, despite always being very left-wing and almost voting for things like what we say over here, the Green Party, which is all about environment and environmentally friendly, and less about like rich people and poor people, but more about preserving and having healthier lives. So she was all for that. He described her as a hippie, and says that he can't have conversations with her anymore because they always go back to Q. And I thought it was interesting that she came from a place of trauma, because a lot of the time cult survivors and victims that I speak to, they were either born into a cult because their parents found the cult because they were in a place of trauma, or they themselves independently gravitated towards a group that love bombed them because they themselves came from a place of trauma. And you spoke about your uncle doing some tours in Afghanistan, and I just wonder if you think that he came from a similar place and that's why he finds something appealing in the QAnon narrative.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, my uncle has thankfully not been the victim of like abuse. But I do know that the tours that he did, as they would anybody, and as they have most people, they kind of messed him up a little bit. So I think that there might be some things that kind of stem from that. I think that he's more distrustful of the government,
right?
Because of his experience in the military. I don't know how much I want to speak to that because a lot of it would be speculation. But I think that his time in the military has maybe made him more willing to accept you. But I don't know if it's the same where there's like trauma.
Yeah, I don't know if trauma would be the right word to use, but it's almost like if you are going to join the Air Force and you're going to go over to a place where because I know that my uncle, he was in the army over here in England, and he went over there a few times to fix aircraft so that they could be flown back over. And he didn't particularly see anything nefarious or traumatic, to use that word again. So, your uncle could have gone over there and had the same experience, not necessarily seen anything. There's a survivor of the troubled teen industry that I speak to quite regularly called Michael, who I've interviewed, and he actually lost a leg from an IED. So he has one of those experiences, and if your uncle or anybody else has gone over there and has had even something similar to the experience that Michael has had, I can see why somebody might read about somebody wanting to change the world for the better and change all the things that are wrong and make sure that these things don't happen anymore and stop things like IEDs exploding and people losing limbs and really awful, horrible, life-changing things like that. I might come back from Afghanistan and say, do you know what? I want to believe in these things because I've had a horrible experience and this person is promising some kind of positive change. And I need that after my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that there's definitely legitimacy to that. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I think that my uncle was in the force both for President Bush and for President Obama.
Right. Okay.
And so he got, presidents that were, I think that he got presidents that were on both in both parties, and
very different approaches to
right.
to the action being taken over in that part of the world.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if maybe the target audience, much like cult recruitment and indoctrination, would be people that come from those experiences, or searching for something better and greater than the experiences that they've had. But
so I think, and I don't know that this is the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if like ex-military people are part of their target, because in the conspiracy theory, President Trump is recruited by the military, and other branches of the government are seen as the bad guys. So the FBI, the NSA, the CIA are all the bad guys, and the militaries are the good guys. And I'll give some legitimacy. Like the CIA they've done some really messed up stuff.
Yeah.
Like really, really bad. So, and this is again another tangent, but like part of the thing with Q is that like there's just like little nuggets of legitimate truth sprinkled into things, and then those things get expounded. So like the CIA is messed up, and it has done messed up things. I think it's going too far to say that the president has been recruited by the military in order to combat the CIA. Sex trafficking is a real thing that should be combated. I just don't think that it is that it's happening in the way that QAnon believers say that it's happening.
Yeah. Do you think that there is the potential for QAnon to move off of the internet and start causing real life harm?
I do. And that's one of the things that it kind of concerns me the most. I don't think that everybody's going to go out and do it. So the people that I know personally in my life, I don't think are going to be the people that
no
would do that. But I mean, I've read enough people that are into Q to know that they're ready to go.
Yeah. I go back to the Pizzagate incident of the supposed child sex abuse and trafficking going on in the basement of the pizza restaurant, and then somebody stormed the restaurant with a gun, and then it turned out there was no basement in the pizzeria itself. And I'm just wondering if there is the potential for some of these messages to be interpreted in such a way that more people with firearms start storming places, and especially if there's an area of notable Joe Biden supporters, for example, and people who really do believe in the efficacy of Q, won't tolerate that.
Yeah. And I do think that's the case. And the problem is that like you don't know everybody that's in Q. Some of them are very vocal about it, and some of them aren't. And so there's already in some areas a bent towards kind of taking things into your own hands and quote defending yourselves or your country or whatever violently, or at least with the threat of violence. You see that a lot, and so I do think that there is a potential, especially with some of the things that President Trump or his team has said, that not saying that he specifically is saying, I want people to go and do these violent things, but because of the way that a lot of Q believers will interpret the Q messages,
yes, exactly.
They interpret President Trump's message the same way, and so they read into it, oh, okay, this is what I got to do.
And it's scary because he's not He's not a fan of the LGBTQIA community group. He
Hmm.
is he's historically patriarchal, and his view towards women is very archaic. So it is, and obviously the refugees, asylum seekers, it's people of color. China, for example, he's been absolutely so disgustingly racist towards China as a country because of the coronavirus. And it's scary to think about who might be targeted if people were to, like you say, interpret Trump's messages, because he's notoriously vague with his statements.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And like, I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of, I mean, worldwide for sure, but especially in the U.S., we're seeing a lot of like Black Lives Matter protests happening. And from the conservatives' perspective, they're like almost always like they'll say like, well, I don't have a problem with peaceful protests, but these people are just rioting the streets. And like you do have some riots, but by and large, they're peaceful, and
Yep,
it's just
yep,
the
yep,
police are like certain people will go in there and make them violent,
yep, yep.
or they're just
Usually law
reporting.
enforcement as well, if because like you say, and this is where it's hard to wrap your head around, because mainstream media report the looting and the rioting and the peaceful protests that turn violent, usually from some sort of instigation from law enforcement, who have basically just been given the green light to take whatever measures necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have platforms like Reddit, where people will upload live them being shot with pellets on their doorstep for standing out there filming police instigating this type of behavior, or old men being knocked down on the street for just walking down the street with their shopping, and these horrible things that have come out. So then you start to question whether you really can trust the mainstream media. But
Right.
then I feel like the mainstream media is supporting the right-wing messages by putting out the fact that left-wing protesters, peaceful protesters, can't be trusted because they're breaking into stores and stealing things.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
just always comes around in these cycles and loops, and it
Yeah.
gets so foggy and hard to like detangle it all.
Yeah. Yep.
And something interesting that you mentioned before was that QAnon will say that people like Hillary Clinton and people involved with Jeffrey Epstein, and they're creating these and these bad actors. I keep wanting to say Parliament, but it's not Parliament where you are. So these bad actors in Parliament, they have these false narratives, and they're using these false narratives to maintain control over members of the public. But at the same time, I feel, and they maintain control through division of people. But I feel like in America, and obviously tell me if this is wrong because I'm not an American, the propaganda that you will have shoved down your throats leading up to the election is all about division of your political beliefs and values and views towards the left wing or the right wing. And you will have this on billboards and social media ads, and you'll have your socials tailored by bots that have algorithms that will shove these messages, and you can't get away from them. And people I've spoken to have said, I need to take a break from the internet because I can't breathe. So I feel like Q supporters are saying that this is what the deep state are inflicting on us. They're inflicting these false narratives to maintain control and create division. But I feel that's exactly what the political parties do constantly, but almost to the point where you can't breathe around election time.
Right. And I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the party division is crazy here. And I think that like it's the inevitable outcome of having a two-party system. So like we have third-party options, but like a huge argument that people will use is just like, well, you shouldn't vote for a third party because they're not going to win. And
Yeah, it's the
so,
same with things like our Green Party. We also have a
yeah,
party over here called the Monster Raving Loony Party, who put policies out like we will rave 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and
we have
and
a we have a guy. I don't know if he's running this year or not because I haven't seen him, but like he's run quite a few times. His name is Vernon Supreme, and like I think his message is that he's gonna like give he's like, everybody's gonna have like a unicorn or
yeah,
be ready for the
sometimes you
zombie
need this in the
apocalypse.
light of all
Um,
this division and
yeah,
stuff. I mean, I know that a lot of houses and businesses and streets and all that stuff and bridges in America have the flag outside, which is not something you see too commonly over here in England. So I can only imagine that during election time, it's just leaflets, badges, flyers, buses, or just everything
oh
has
yeah,
one face or the other, and
yeah.
it's just in
It's inescapable.
yeah. So I mean, it's just interesting that Q supporters are saying that this is what the deep state are doing, when actually you can actually see that this is what the politicians that Q are saying are going to save them are actually doing. You
Yeah.
can see it. You can physically see that that's what's happening.
And like, so one of the things that's interesting is that they will, from what I've seen, they kind of try to act somewhat bipartisan in a way, like, because they would condemn many Republicans too. So like they would say, so Q has said in terms of people that are guilty of doing things that they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
they don't just say it's the Democrats. I mean that's who they point to the most, and there are posts that are just like the Democrats are doing this and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like in some of the ones that I read, it's like all Democrats and most Republicans even. And so they try to have this like, well, it's not about politics, it's not about party affiliation because most of the Republicans are bad too. It's just that we're using this party.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyone other
and,
than Trump.
yeah, right, yeah. So yeah, and that's like because I asked my uncle for like a list of politicians.
Yeah.
Because I know that Q people don't think that all of them are bad.
Yeah.
They would to like 70% or something like that. Like all the Democrats and a lot of the Republicans. It's like which Republicans are good then?
Yeah.
Who can I trust?
Yeah.
So.
And what is the election climate like right now? Do you think Trump's going to win the election? Are you going to vote? And if so, who are you going to vote for? What is it like over there at the moment? Because we've only got 1 month to go. So I know things are probably ramping up by now.
Yeah. I think that it is very hard to tell who is going to win. Right now, I think all of the polls are saying that Joe Biden is going to win, or that Joe Biden is leading in the polls. But like
Trump was elected in the first time, and the polls
like
didn't say that was going to happen. So
yeah, it's the way that the system is set up in America is our president isn't elected by popular vote, and so like I don't think that there has been a Republican that has been elected by popular vote since I've been alive, because maybe Bush's second one, but I'm not sure about that. It's like because it's the Electoral College that that's the official say. So it's really hard to tell if President Trump is going to be reelected or not. I am not voting for him. I am normally a person that is, I am not. I don't want to vote for either party, and so I'm going to use my vote to try to get third parties more in the spotlight. That's unfortunately that's not how I'm using my vote this time, just because I'm so concerned about President Trump. So I will be voting for Biden this year.
Yeah. I mean, everybody was saying what is the lesser of two evils when it was him and Clinton. I feel like that's the same message that's coming across.
One of the things that's really weird to me is so like I kind of get it from a perspective of Clinton. Like most Democrats don't, or not, I don't know about most, but many Democrats do not like Hillary Clinton. And like, I'm pretty sure that like the DNC messed some stuff up with that nomination, and it really probably should have gone to Bernie Sanders instead of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, that would have been the best for me, for us over here, in me and my echo chamber. We're rooting for Bernie over here.
Yeah. And so, but like, um, they are, uh, like, they're trying to posit things the exact same with Joe Biden of like, Joe Biden is just this radical leftist. And it's like, he's really not. I mean,
Not,
he's left
no.
for sure, but he's not a radical left. And like, in some things, I don't like, as somebody, like, I would consider myself a centrist. And so like, I have certain, things that I'm like, all right, well, that's more right, and certain things that's more
Yeah.
left. Um, and it's like on some things, like I'm maybe a little more left on this certain
Yeah.
thing than Joe Biden is.
Yeah.
And so
Which is
it's so
where
weird.
Bernie is. That's where Bernie is, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Though I feel
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, we had Democrats are closely linked to our Labour Party, and Republicans are closely linked to our Conservative Party. Is kind of left and right in how you would look at it in that way. And we had a Labour leader party called Jeremy Corbyn, and he's like a classed as a socialist, and he was radical left, in my opinion. And all of a sudden he's anti-Semitic and all about, and then literally I read the same article about Bernie Sanders when they've both actually been advocates for the voices of Jewish people for their entire political campaigns. But yet there's this smear campaign. So, you've got the harm against children, and then what's one of the worst acts against humanity that's ever happened in the history of time. You've got all the stuff to do with the Nazis and the Holocaust. So then you label him as anti-Semitic. He's not harming children, but he's a Nazi sympathizer.
Yeah.
So that was the same sort of thing. And it's difficult because Jeremy Corbyn's not a Labour leader anymore, and the Conservatives are still in the House at the moment over here, and Boris Johnson's not great. So it's hard, and I can't tell from over here which way the vote's going to go. Obviously I'm going to say it's going to go towards Joe Biden, but that's me again and my echo chamber, which was why I was so shocked when Trump got in, because that's not what anybody on my social media feed or anybody that I surround myself, nobody had that popular opinion. And if they did, they kept it to themselves because they knew they were surrounded by people that didn't have that popular opinion.
Yeah. I think so. As somebody, like, I would not consider myself a Republican or a Democrat. I'm voting Democrat this year, but that's, I wouldn't consider myself either of those parties. But like, I feel like, and this is just my perspective, that the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, like, they're just shooting themselves in the foot with the people that they could have picked. I truly believe they could have picked literally anybody other than Hillary Clinton, and they would have won. But because they picked Hillary Clinton, like, Hillary Clinton has been the poster child for like right-wing like hatred.
Yeah.
Like, ever since I can remember, So, and again, you have a lot of Democrats that aren't for her either.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, you kind of get that feeling about them over here, and obviously the Q message at the moment is only furthering that opinion that people have of the Clintons. But I mean, what can family and friends do now if they find themselves having these conversations with family members who are in support of Q?
Yeah, so that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. And it's going to vary because, like, it's going to vary because people they aren't the same. And so you are going to have those family members that are very belligerent about it, and, ready at arms. And then you're going to have people that, they think that this is where the evidence leads, and they think that they are being rational about their approach. And so it's hard because on the one end, it's like you're going to want to just kind of blow it off and just be like, this is just nonsense. And I'm not going to like, you're being an idiot because you believe this. And that's just going to alienate people and it's going to be hard.
It sounds almost as if you're saying that it's really difficult to challenge the beliefs of Q supporters because they will always come back to you and say, no, but you're wrong because of this and this and this. And it's, and it's really like talking to an ignorant person who's not interested in the, you know, the facts that you have or the information that you have, because they already have their information and they don't want to listen to.
So like as I mentioned, I wish that I had responded differently to my uncle. And I don't think that I was rude. What I said for sure kind of pushed him away from listening to me on these things. And so it's hard to strike the balance of, you know, combating views that I think are, because I think that the QAnon thing is dangerous. And so it's hard to like, and because they're dangerous, I don't want my loved ones to be involved with it. And so it's hard to balance that feeling and also like maintain gentleness and kindness, you know, throughout it. And not get, you know, shoved down their throat that I think that they're wrong, you know. So I think that it's kind of a balancing act, and it's going to vary, I think, depending on the personality of the person that you're talking to.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult one, especially as this movement shows no signs of slowing down or stopping. A lot of people have said that now that the floodgate has opened, there's no way to contain this. Obviously, it can't be policed. Twitter are trying to shut down accounts that are affiliated with Q purely because of the misinformation that is being spread and the lack of fact checking that is coming out with these articles. So there's policing in that sense, but there's nothing to stop that person having their account banned, starting up another account and continuing to spread these messages that have not been fact checked or are not accurate. So it's difficult, especially because during COVID, I'm sure a lot of people that have had to stay home have found themselves going down rabbit holes of disinformation and not having necessarily coherent conversations with people outside of their own brain at 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and then sleeping the next day or the next morning, and then waking up and opening their social medias and doing it all again, reading all this information, and more people have shared more posts and there's more access to information. And then, you know, because of the lockdown, you're not able to go out and have a coffee with a friend and speak about something different. You're just living and eating, breathing these messages that are going through social media. So I don't think COVID has helped in any way in that sense. It is worrying, and I hope that there won't be any offline harm that comes from this movement in terms of people getting physically harassed or targeted, abused or harmed. There's no way to tell yet. I suppose we'll have to wait until the election comes and is announced. Who knows what might happen in the next 4 weeks in terms of Q's messages as the election comes up. We'll just have to wait and see. But do any of the students you teach speak about Q?
So I have not heard anybody that I teach talk about Q. I do know, I think that there's a teacher at my school that has talked about it, but it might have been another conspiracy theory.
Right. Okay.
That, actually two teachers, they're both social studies teachers, at least in my district that I know, that like they mentioned that conspiracy theories are kind of like every year conspiracy theories get a little bit more predominant in their classes, they find. I have had former students. Yeah, I have had former students not share like QAnon things, but share things that are associated with QAnon, not knowing, like the Save the Children thing. So,
and I guess my last question for you, Paul, is you mentioned that you are Christian. Do you think that Q is being followed by predominantly religious people, or is it more, as you said in your original Reddit post, co-ops religion in order to push their narrative and create a hive mind echo chamber?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both, and it's a really good question. So, I guess to start, I will say that Christian QAnon proponents are a fringe movement in Christianity. So I don't think that it's a big group of Christians that are into this. I do think, though, that it would be accurate to say that the majority of people in Q probably would identify as Christian, or at least religious in some sort of extent. So like in my own personal experience, this isn't so much the case. So like my former college roommate and high school friend is an atheist, and he thinks that religion is total BS. My uncle has always, I think, been like a theist of some sort, but not particularly Christian. And actually, like, this is one of the things that kind of makes me nervous, is because like he is actually starting to get more into Christianity. And so like on the one hand, that makes me happy because, you know, as a Christian, I'm glad that he's having this budding relationship with Jesus. And on the other hand, it makes me nervous because it's coming in the midst of, and possibly even the result of, a conspiracy theory that I think flies in the face of what Jesus teaches and what the Bible teaches and stuff like that. Like a big example of it, like the 9th commandment is you shall not bear false witness. And that's all that QAnon does. It's all, you know. So, but in America, there's a lot of different factors that affect how Christians may be susceptible to these kinds of conspiracy theories. And most of these revolve around how the American Christian church has found itself wrapped up in nationalism. And adding to that is like what we would call cultural Christianity. So Christianity has been the majority religion in America for a long time. And so it's entrenched in the culture. And so this leads people to accepting, or like claiming to accept, the tenets of the faith without actually like, we would say knowing, without actually practicing, without, we would say, knowing Jesus personally. And things like that. So they would say that they're a Christian, and but that Christianity is rooted with their culture. And so they look at Christianity through their cultural lens, which, I mean, we all do to some extent. We view everything through our cultural lens. But a lot of, like, it's Americanized. And so, and there are like several different trends that have kind of been brewing in the American church that kind of reached their culmination in QAnon. So an example with this is kind of like the Satanic Panic from the 80s. This is essentially a revamping of that. You know,
I can see that, actually. I can see that perfectly.
Because I mean, the bad actors are Satan worshiping, baby eating pedophiles, you know.
And everyone's scared of that. Everyone's terrified of that.
So, and like, so while some fringe groups are accepting of Q, there are a lot of Christian voices that are speaking against it. So we have like several Christian news outlets here, like the Gospel Coalition, Christianity Today, Relevant, that have all given pieces speaking out against QAnon. I wanted to kind of read this little bit because Christianity Today had an interview with a pastor from Australia. Mark Sayers, and I think that he has a really good commentary on how the Christian church, like how they got to be this way with QAnon. So he says, as an Australian, I'm a minority as a Christian. The first church in Australia was burnt down, and I never expected to have power as a Christian in my country. My sense is that what America is going through is a shaking of cultural Christianity. I've always thought of America as a more Christian culture than Australia, but based on recent Barna report and the breakdown of millennials who are resilient disciples and those who are habitual Christians, the number of resilient disciples, those who follow the Bible, is almost per capita the same amount as in Australia. The difference, and the reason why the American church is bigger, is there are a heck of a lot more habitual or cultural Christians. I think you guys are coming into this space, and it's scary, and there's a sense of loss of power. There's a loss of position. And I feel like QAnon plays into that sense of people having lost power. So this gives them an explanation. And I think that that's a big part of it because as the Christian church in America has been a predominant driving force in a lot of different things, and that version of Christianity is very Americanized.
Yeah.
And so, like, even when you have things that aren't non-Christian, and like, we are seeing a lot of things in America that aren't Christian, and as you would expect in a country that at least claims to be open to all religious, beliefs.
Yeah.
But even if you have takes on Christianity that are outside of what the predominant American Christianity looks like, it's going to be viewed as not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gonna be construed as a loss of power for that. So I think that that's a really good, or a really big factor. And so there are, I think, like, a lot of cultish things that QAnon does. I think that, like, kind of specifically play into how Christians in America would take it. So for example, there's like the us versus them mentality. Like, for them, it's literally a fight between good versus evil, light versus dark, God fears versus Satan. And Q has at times quoted the Bible. I think that he's quoted it somewhere between 6 and 12 times. I forget the number.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I've seen people look at the Q drops. And again, he doesn't explain things, or she or they, like, they drop things, and then it's left up to us to figure out what it is he meant. But I've seen people look at the Q drops and, like somebody said, we're not fighting humans. This is a spiritual war. We are fighting demons and Satan himself, like, talking about the current situation. And it's scary because, like, they're co-opting these religious themes and stuff. And the people who, would accept those themes are buying into this co-opting of it.
Yeah.
So did you have a question?
No, I was just going to go on and say that what you mentioned about a sense of loss or power, it is usually what makes a strong-willed, intelligent person ripe for indoctrination. So a lot of people will be trained in how to love bomb and indoctrinate people into the fold of their sect or cult. And they will pick people who, again, have that sense of loss or loss of power, whether that comes through abuse or trauma or bereavement or grief, or a lot of people that are disfellowshipped from Jehovah's Witnesses are excommunicated from friends and family and anyone that they've ever known and loved, which puts them in a position of being ripe to be indoctrinated into another movement. So when you speak about that and habitual cultural Christianity, if I am in America and my mum is a devout Christian and I'm not particularly I don't attend church every Sunday, but on paper I'm going to tick the box that says that I identify as a Christian because I've been brought up with Christian values, but I'm not necessarily wearing a cross or praying before mealtime or going to Sunday services. And then on the flip side of that, you've got your uncle who is now leaning more towards Christianity, which is going to be upsetting for you as a Christian, because if he's going to find and start a relationship with God, you want him to do that on a spiritual journey, not on a coercive journey that has come through Q drops that have scripture included in them, or QAnon members who are predominantly Christian. So what you're saying is it's like you've said, it's a culmination of lots of different things that are quite scary when you put them all together.
So I think Q also hits into this vein of American Christianity that is obsessed with like the end time stuff. Um, I'm not sure how prevalent this kind of thing is in other countries, but like in America, the end times is a really big deal. Um, like QAnon itself doesn't really espouse a particular end times view, but I think that it does hit home with a lot of different ideas that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Christians have of what the end
Mm-hmm.
times looks like. Um, and like I've seen people online claiming that like the vaccine for the coronavirus is going to have a microchip in it, and that the microchip is going to be the mark of the beast. And I've heard like microchip equals the mark of the beast, like since I've heard people say that since I was a kid. And because in America, we like have a lot of times there's like a specific view of the end times
Yeah.
that is actually not very historic to Christianity and is not as common outside of America.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's the left behind view where like people are going to be, you know, raptured up to heaven, and then there's going to be like 7 years of tribulation and all of these things. That's not historically, that's not like a predominant position of the church, but that's what you find a lot here.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that the people in America that, you know, hold this view, a lot of the things that they're seeing in the Q drops, they think are associated with what they think is going to happen at the end times.
Right.
And so it makes them a little more driven, I think, to kind of be susceptible to that. And it makes them more susceptible to just not trusting the media and people of other cultural backgrounds, because they have this view that like, well, there's going to be this new world order, and so like everything there is like the entire system is going to be somewhat satanic, and so you just can't trust any of it. So when Q tells people that the mainstream media is all fake news and that you are the news, it's much more palatable to people for that message. So I think that Q is actually kind of really smart in the way that they are co-opting religious elements into their perspective, and especially for the American religion. Because they do it in a way that is so subtle, and like they have explicit references to God and the Bible and stuff like that. But just as with anything that they have, it's up to you to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like as Christians, we believe that like, you know, or I guess, yeah, like the main core tenet of Christianity is that like we're all sinners, we're all broken, and we're all separated from God, which is why, you know, God has to come to us and save us out of that, because he has love for us and everything. And because of that, we're supposed to love other people. And so it's concerning when you have that same religion being co-opted to an ideology that is like, these people are doing bad things. I'm not going to give you any proof for it. This is just the bad things that they're doing, and they're all Satan worshipers, and they're literally working with Satan.
Yeah. But in a say, you're condemning those people, but you're also not giving them an opportunity to right their wrongs, which is obviously another huge part of Christianity and having a relationship with God.
Right. Yeah. And so like there's a kind of a double whammy, because in Christianity, in both the Old and the New Testament, we are told that if somebody brings an accusation against somebody, there's supposed to be two witnesses to that. So like, it's not just one person saying, oh yeah, this guy stole something. Like, I mean, there are going to be instances where, you know, that is the case, where like only one person is the witness. And, you know, obviously the Bible has those exceptions in there. But predominantly, like, you're supposed to have multiple witnesses when you bring an accusation to somebody. And this is just one guy toting off a bunch of accusations against somebody, and people just buying into it without any sort of backing. And there is definitely a degree of like not accepting people of different views. Everybody that disagrees with you is you know, Satan worshiping, you know, and doing these terrible, heinous, like, child sacrifice things.
And there's all the things as well that come with cult levels of control with things like, you mentioned the us versus them. There's going to be the holier than thou mentality, because you are the news, and if you don't believe in Q, your head is buried in the sand, and we are the awakened, we are the awokened, we are superior to you because we have the true knowledge that you won't accept, and these are very, very closely linked to cult mentalities. And you mentioned the doomsday prophecies that are prevalent in Christianity across America. Obviously, Christianity is the whole umbrella, and underneath that you've got the Millerites, the Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and all of these different denominations have these doomsday prophecies and end times prophecies. What is interesting about those things is the Millerites, Seventh-day Adventists all predicted the end of the world over and over and over again. And it never happened. And that is directly linked to the original first 4chan post by Q, who said that Hillary Clinton would be arrested, and she wasn't. Yet people will follow the leaders of Seventh-day Adventists. And even, I've just done some coverage on my Patreon about the Branch Davidians, who are a branch of the Seventh-day Adventists, who are a branch of the Millerites. So all of these denominations that fed down to the Branch Davidians, and him saying that those doomsday prophecies in the end times, and there's a biblical war coming, and they're going to be the ones to start it. This is dangerous rhetoric to be spreading. And even though the end of the world never came, for any of these people that gave dates or just gave vague timelines and vague windows for these things to happen, they're still followed by thousands, millions of people. So I mean, even if you were to say to somebody, well, Hillary Clinton wasn't arrested, what basis does that give for you to disprove Q, when people still follow religions that have doomsday end time prophecies that have just never come to fruition?
One of the things that we're seeing with Q is and even a lot of people on the right, is this willingness to rebel against the government at any turn. And I think that stems from America's founding, because we're founded by rebellion. We rebelled against you guys, and that's how we started. And so that influences how we read things, because in the Bible, you're not supposed to rebel against the government.
No. I know Jehovah's Witnesses aren't even supposed to vote. I'm not exactly sure where they get that one, but there are more pacifistic groups, and I can totally see where they're Quakers are pacifists, and I can see where they're coming with that. And so there are explicit places where you're not supposed to rebel against the government, but then you have people here that are so willing to disregard what the government says in matters that wouldn't violate your principles as a Christian. And it's just, well, the government's overreaching, and so I'm going to do this kind of thing. It's well, that's not, you're looking at that through your specific cultural lens, but that's not the way you see it.
Right. Yeah. That's not how it's actually supposed to be read. I mean, at least from my take, so.
I mean, it's interesting. It's hard to speak about Q without going on a rampage about Donald Trump, because they're so closely linked to one another. And I feel like you can't be a Q supporter if you're not a Trump supporter. And if you're a Trump supporter, then by default, you're almost a Q supporter, because those two things are so, they are so combined now. I know this is a podcast about cults, and people are probably going to be listening to this or what? But I do consider QAnon to be the first major online cult movement. There are lots of different methods being used by Q, and now its followers as well, on other people. And also my favorite cult expert, Stephen Hassan, who I speak about all the time, has actually recently released a book called The Cult of Trump. where he has listed in depth all of the reasons why Trump is a cult leader and his followers will blindly follow him and be devout to him till the end of time, no matter how much he gaslights his own followers by saying one thing and then immediately disregarding that and saying the opposite thing in the same breath. And if he says, I didn't say that, even though you can hear him on a playback of that clip actually saying it, all of his followers will say he didn't say that and agree with him. So there's a really interesting book by Stephen Hassan called The Cult of Trump. So if anybody wanted a legitimate reason why we've spoken in depth about these political topics and not cults, then there's my cult link and reference. QAnon, I think you could apply a lot of the bite model by Stephen Hassan that I use when I'm interviewing cult survivors and victims. Absolutely, a lot of those points can be applied to Q followers. I just hope that there is, like you've been able to have, Paul, space for rational discussion between family members, because as you mentioned on the Q subreddits, you can go and read horrible, tragic stories of family members who people are getting divorced, children are becoming estranged from their parents because they can't have these rational conversations. It's becoming really damaging to people who like wholly believe in Q and people that just cannot like have a rational conversation with family members and loved ones anymore. So it really is sad, and it's spreading like wildfire now. It's in the last 6 months it's just blown up and it's everywhere. So hopefully anybody that's listening and had these experiences might be able to sit down and have rational conversations and just try and be patient with your family members and share fact-checked information, even if they won't listen to it or accept it, because who knows, maybe one small piece of that information might stick, even though you might be told that you know that you are the news and all those things. Hopefully there is space for those conversations to happen and for families to not become disconnected because of this subject. But I'll be closely watching America over the next 4 weeks to see how the vote goes, and this episode is going to be released the day before the vote, so who knows what political climate you'll be living in at that point. But I wish you luck over the next 4 weeks and with the rest of your journey, Paul, and just thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, so thank you.
That is the end of this week's episode. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a review of the podcast. Get in touch at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod.